On this episode of OnPoint, we're joined by Giuseppe Sollazzo, Deputy Director and Head of Data Enablement at DWP Digital. Giuseppe joins us to talk about the importance of knowing your data, why data governance is not your enemy, patient-centered care and public accountability, and much, much more. If you'd like to get in touch with the show or you'd like to be a guest on the next season of OnPoint, please email us at onpoint@amarti.io. Now, on with the show. Giuseppe, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thanks for coming on. We always start the show by asking for a brief introduction for the listeners. Would you mind doing that for us?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Giuseppe Sollazzo. I'm currently Deputy Director for Data Enablement at the Department for Work and Pensions, so the civil servant, UK government.
Amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. We'll dive straight into it. Giuseppe, how do we ensure data is accessible across large organisations?
That's a very good question. And when I say
nice and open.
Yeah, across large organization. Obviously, we can talk about internally because we are a large organization, but also across government. I think there are two elements I'd like to raise, and I'll try and be brief. We can explore them. But one is obviously the know your data aspect. So how do we make sure that we know what data we have, what data we produce, what data quality it is, and what uses are made of that data. And that's very important. It's very technical, and that's part of what my team is working on. The other is obviously making that data useful and usable by others. And I think there's a lot to be said because often we work in an environment where it's difficult to share data, or it is perceived to be difficult. There's governance, and I come from a technical background where governance is always seen as a bit of a difficulty. Well, in reality, I'm a big fan of governance. I think governance is there to protect people, and governance done well is actually fast and clear and creates, boundaries and assurances for people, and the impact of using that data the right way is great. I mean, I'm going to just mention one thing we do across the border, let's say between DWP and HMRC, which is bits of work that I was looking at recently, the payment for bereavement support, and that's actually a very important thing, supporting people at some of the most vulnerable times of their lives, and that's made possible quicker and, let's say, less cumbersome for people by the ability of sharing data across the two departments. So a lot of impact can be achieved by good data accessibility.
Can I jump in with a question? I just want to go back to the start of what you said, which was know your data. Do you not think it's a bit of a journey to get there for any organisation first? Because I think the amount of organisations I speak to and we work with, if I said, do you know your data? I think the answers would be varied, but actually they're probably all the same, which is, I'm not sure that I do. So what about if we just go back to that kind of journey first? How do we know our data? How do we even start to know our data?
That's a good point, and you will find there's a lot of degrees of maturity in that journey. And by the way, I have friends who work in all sorts of businesses, charities, private sector, startups. You will find varied things. So it's often in government we say, "Oh, you're not good at this," and there's variety of levels of maturities, both across different industries and sectors. I'd say we've gone through different stages, and there are different stages of data maturity in an organization. So there is often a first phase in which an organization starts using data. And in that phase, often what you have is this idea, we need to have a data catalog, and we create this entity and we start throwing all data sets that we know of into that catalog. And that's actually, it's a first step, and it's a good step because it allows people to come to terms with the idea that we can develop some knowledge. We can share some knowledge about data we have. Is that good enough for the future purposes, which are discoverability and management of data? Often not. So often there's a second phase in which usually a more mature organization that has understood the problem, maybe sometimes with a data leader would be probably moving from an analyst into a more digital organizational person. You will have a situation in which you ask, okay, but how do we embed all this in the business? So it goes from throw stuff into a pot and then try and look through it into actually we can make this a more sustainable process. And actually that transition is the transition we're working on at the moment, which is going from we have thousands of data sets on our data catalog, but the reality is that is a bit untidy, and we can structure that more and work with people in the business to say, what data are you producing in your daily job, and what data are you using? And sometimes these two things are not the same. So often you start talking with the rest of the business, and I think you get in that model of iteration. And that, I think, it's my personal transition professionally has been to going from the IT analysis into digital thinking and trying to merge these two things
and I guess
those ways of working.
And I guess it brings up data ownership as well, then, doesn't it? It kind of ties them all in. So like who's going to own the data as well, and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, and it's a journey. Okay, so going from, so now let's say we know our data, and I think going into accessibility, if we kind of like look into that a little bit, I think for me, a lot of the time people use phrases like, I don't know which data we have, I can't access the data, I don't know how to access the data, or it's too complex, it's too technical, I need someone technical to give it to me. But that's actually not how it works, is it? You can be in a position where anybody can access data, the right data, for example, if it's governed correctly.
Yeah, and once again, it's a journey. So if you think some of the work we do, I mean, I'm directly involved in about 200 plus data products. And those data products enable things like welfare payment benefits, or one of actually the ones I'm still impressed of. We run the electoral registration system on behalf of the local authorities. So that's a lot of data with a lot of potential problems around it. Now, I think every organization experiences the first phase of a bit of a cottage industry, in which there is a centralized model, in which there is a data team producing data pipelines on behalf of the business. And that often produces a situation of you create one data pipeline which serves one purpose, and then you create another data pipeline that create another purpose, and you don't even question if there is an overlap between the two. So to me, when you talk about accessibility, a first and important approach is to say, are there any common data problems that we're trying to solve? Do we have any common data patterns that we should be delivering? And then the key questions starts being asked, and that involves, for example, reference data. So are we using some data sets that are constantly, they say constant among different business cases? Often we talk about addresses. Addresses for most businesses will be a reference data set, because we get that from I don't know, Royal Mail or Ordnance Survey, and that is the same for everyone. And that obviously should be available once, probably through an API, and made it's a central service. But then we start asking questions around what are the derivative products, and are we producing derivative products that are themselves a reference data service, or maybe that they need to be common entities. And all this is very contextual. Going back to the addresses, for us, an address is a reference point. But if you think about Royal Mail or a local authority, well, address might be an entity of data in itself, because they create those entities. So what is reference, what is, let's say, master data, and what is regular data changes across different sides of the same business. And I think that's a fascinating aspect of making data accessible.
Yeah, and I also think by defining that earlier on, which is reference data, it also helps you model the data correctly as well, doesn't it? Because then I guess you can know what your primary keys are, your secondary keys, and you can go from there, because you could. But I think it begs a bigger question as well. I'm just playing devil's advocate here a little bit. I think like it's a big assumption to think that all organizations look holistically. What I find is that each organization has a project here, a project there, a project here, and everybody just runs off and does what they want, which goes back to your initial point, where you end up with loads of different data pipelines and ingestion, and it becomes into a bit of a spaghetti junction, because actually they're not thinking, okay, so I need to visualize this data over here, I need to maybe model it a little bit better and have it visualized in some way. Let me just see, does anybody else need it, or has anybody else already done it? Because I think the other thing that ends up coming into it is people run to decentralize their data when they're not ready for it to be decentralized. And then what you end up with is lots of centralized parts of data, actually, and it becomes even more messier. So how would you tackle some like normal business issues that get in the way of being a little bit holistic and actually doing it the right way?
So my call to arms on this is it's actually two words. The first is multidisciplinary, and the second is iterative. And that's, I think, what I've learned moving from being an IT person to a data person and adopting digital ways of working. It's the fact that, first of all, to do data well, you need to have multiple people around the table. So it's not just data engineers, not just data scientists, not just policy people, not just digital people. It's all these people around the table trying to understand what's the right thing. And iterative, I think, is the thing that qualifies work done well, because I'm pretty sure, especially in a context like where the one we work in, government is obviously it's about different political parties or sometimes different currents within the same party taking power, and each one of these produces changes in policy, sometimes subtle changes in policy, sometimes revolutionary changes in policy. So the key element of any data work done well, to me, is the test of any data work done well is how fast can we adapt to those changes in policy. And once again, you were making that interesting point around centralization versus decentralization. I think there's never going to be a final answer what's the best model. The best model evolves, and sometimes things start, as you say, in the business, and the cottage industry happens, then it gets brought centrally. But bringing things centrally sometimes create bottlenecks. So there is then a drive to say, well, actually, we should be re-decentralizing, but with increased maturity, because that move has already created that maturity and an understanding of what the common problems are. So what we're doing to the DWP now, we're trying to implement a hub and spoke model for our data. And that actually comes from having created that central team about 10 years ago, then evolving it, realizing what the bottlenecks are, and now saying, well, actually, the organization is mature enough in its ability to deal with data, but we still need the center to set that standards and exactly to pick up on those signals that you were mentioning. So the duplication of data and the ability to have common entities.
And I think also I was just going to pick up on something you said. Also, when you have like a little bit of a centralized pot as well, it can ensure governance as well. So like they can enforce the governance through the tooling. And I don't like to say certain phrases because people get really. The audience can sometimes get a little bit excitable and send me DMs that I'm not prepared for. But I'm going to say I'm just going to say like data mesh style. Like it does work. I think if you can implement something like that and it works for your organization, I think that's the other thing as well. Is it right for the organization? I always think like 15 years ago when this is going to be really controversial, when agile became popular. I'm just going to say that I'm a big advocate of agile. I'm a big advocate for the right methodology for the right organization. That's how I want to say it. But when it became popular, everybody rushed to implement Scrum teams, for example, and that was it. It's going to be Scrum teams, and it didn't actually, for a lot of organizations, actually it didn't work. Some organizations were doing a sort of hybrid waterfall agile, pre-popular agile anyway, and it was working actually. And I think that's how people need to look at technology as well, is what is right for the organization. Don't jump on the latest trend. Is your data governed? Do you trust your data? Do you know what data you have? Can you access your data? There's some key principles there. And I think if you can go with that mind frame, you'll start to do the right things anyway for your organization.
And also, once again, I want to highlight governance as a bad name, but governance is about doing things right, and it's not about doing things slowly. And I keep quoting this example from my work in the NHS, where my job in the NHS was basically running an AI accelerator for the NHS, and it meant engaging with the NHS Trust. So we did about, I think, 20 plus projects, and the variety of duration of the governance process was remarkable, because the fastest was 3 weeks, so all the sign off achieved in 3 weeks, and the slowest was 17 months for 3 months projects. So wow. And that variance tells you, I think, more about the maturity of the organization than anything else. Maturity is not about it's a good or bad thing. It's just, once again, a journey. And just to reveal who was the 3 weeks, NHS Resolution, which is an organization that deals with very serious cases of medical complaints. We're looking specifically at maternity complaints, and obviously an organization that has that in its DNA will not be scared about any new use of data. The people who do data protection and data assurance will be ready to assess that. While on the other end of the spectrum, organizations that maybe have never dealt with that, maybe in this case it was a research institution, which however was not connected to a hospital, and therefore they had a very different approach to medical ethics, to medical assurance. They were scared, and the people on the ground had not reached that level of maturity. So before you know, what happens is that there's this request for a simple access to data request, which then gets sent to someone's manager and to someone's manager and to someone's manager. Before you know, it's reached the chief executive, and obviously the chief executive diary usually in an NHS trust is massive, and or in university is massive as well. And that's what causes the delay. So to me, big lesson was hold hands with the organization, make them get into that journey of data maturity, and that is what actually unlocks governance. It's not about
100%.
avoiding governance.
No, and I also think that there's just a little bit of an education piece, because I think just us as humans, when we think of governance, we think of bureaucracy and we think of process and policy, and data governance is not that. Actually, it's actually liberating and frees you to use your data more confidently and make better decisions, and especially around NHS and stuff like that. It's patient-centered care, right? So it's doing the best for the patient and for the customers it serves, and that's all of us essentially. So I have these guys always make fun of me in the office, actually, and you're always banging about data governance, and I was like, once you kind of get that correct, you can actually let people freely do what they want with the data, because you've embedded the governance in there. They're not, you also you give them guardrails to also fail if they need to fail, and they can fail faster. And actually, once you free people, they're not scared of data anymore, and your journey, again, the maturity happens, and the journey moves a lot smoother and a lot faster, which I think is important, especially in large organizations, whether they're the public or private. I don't think really matters, but for me, thinking about the NHS and patient-centered care and all the things we hear in the news about the NHS as well, like they're trying to do a fabulous service, they're trying to do the best that they can possibly do with limited resources. So let's help them get to that place is even more important.
And you're alluding to a very important topic, which is engagement with the public. And I think, as this ability to talk on the podcast proves, I felt very supported by DWP in that, let's engage with the public, let's talk about the stuff that we're doing, because that actually creates that mutual trust. And I think it's very important for us in the public sector in general, I mean, not just central government, but all public services, is to keep that conversation going and create that mutual trust, because it's that way that we can transform the way we run public services.
100%, because I also know, like, the phrase public accountability comes up a lot when you're talking about public sector organizations, and I think that's important as well. And I just want to touch on a point that you mentioned. I think people often forget. So NHS houses any public sector a wealth of data, and then they'll have their own their own internal initiatives that they want to drive, but then they're pulled and pushed by council and government and what initiatives they're trying to push as well. So they're trying to juggle lots of plates whilst always thinking about patients. They're always thinking about their customers, who are patients ultimately. And I think that when you're trying to go on such a transformation and when you're going on a journey, if that's forgotten, that's really hard. And I do feel a lot sometimes for portfolio managers or directors in the NHS, whatever that kind of level, that they are thinking, right, I really need to drive this initiative because it's really going to help this particular trust, but I'm being pulled in this direction, and then I've got limited resources in terms of finance, in terms of people. I understand it.
I mean, obviously, I haven't been in NHS now for almost 3 years, so I can't possibly comment. Well, one thing I have to say, and I think it applies to all of us working in the public sector, that is part of the way the country is run, and it's right. There is this ongoing conversation that happens between us as let's say the administration, like the permanent people, the civil service, or the public servants, together with the public and the politicians. So the public elects the politicians, and it is our duty and to support them, but also to challenge them whenever it's needed. And I think one thing I've experienced, and I've worked under probably now 7 different governments. I mean, some within the same parties, but basically I've had experience of engaging with that. I think we have a solid system that allows that scrutiny and challenge to continue, and that is 2 ways. I mean, we are challenged by the politicians to do our job better, maybe with fewer resources, and that obviously, in a way, It's difficult when obviously, as we know, we need to have a financial control of everything, but it's also what unleashes creativity and the ability to
And
say, well, actually,
innovation.
maybe there's
Yeah.
another way of solving the same problem. And so, yeah, that's what, in a way, that's what brought me to work in the public sector. I find that challenge exciting, and the idea that we have to, as a taxpayer myself, as we all are, good value for money is a good thing to aspire to.
100%.
So yeah, I think
100%.
I'm sort of happy working in this environment, although
Yeah.
people might say, oh, but it's frustrating and it's slow and there's politics. It's just part of how to do things well,
And
and it's a
and al-
journey.
and also that same stuff happens in private organizations. There's actually more politics in the private organizations anyway. So I mean that's happening everywhere. And I think you're right. I think um, constrained resources breeds innovation. Like it just breeds it, because you have to figure an answer. You have to get to a solution. So you're given your parameters, and you get some good minds in the room, and they're going to go to town with solutions that perhaps no one's ever thought of before. And I think that's really great as well. Ben, you're wanting to ask a question. Sorry, I'll shut
Well, no,
up.
I'm just really, I'm listening intriguingly, really, because Giuseppe and I met recently, and I've been following a lot of his, I guess, posts on LinkedIn, and it's pretty remarkable, really. We talk about 7 different governments and 200 odd data products, and I can't pin you down. You're all over the country. You've been across Europe. You're speaking at so many different events at the moment, and I just find it so interesting, and really the point that you want to speak to, I guess, the customers and consumers and the service that you're doing for the government, I find really, really refreshing. So thank you again for coming on. But
Thank you.
I'm quite interested in, because you're at so many events and because you're talking, what's the big trends you're finding at the moment? What are you enjoying speaking about at the moment? Kind of give you a bit of a platform, because you've given us so much info there.
That's a good point. I mean, honestly, so a lot of my traveling around the country, I have people in 7 locations, and I think a lot of good work happens when you meet people face to face. I mean, we shouldn't get into the whole being in an office thing, but
Yeah.
it is actually important to see people face to face, and I'm sort of enjoying that sort of meeting. And it's also, I think it's important. That's the other thing I do enjoy of the fact that we are such a distributed organization, is the fact that people living in different areas of the country will also experience different challenges in their lives. So especially in a situation like DWP or many other departments having to serve the public, having that distribution is actually really, really good and really refreshing for me. When I meet my colleagues in Newcastle or in Blackpool or in Manchester, I mean, they all actually having different experiences in their life, and that I think is adds to the ability of us of the civil service to actually cope with different situations in life. So that's, I think, one element. And the other, obviously, there's a lot of talking about AI, and my previous job actually was about AI, and I did say when I moved jobs, in this job I'm not going to talk about AI ever, but in fact, actually, happens a lot, because I think good AI is, I always say, I used to say this in my previous job quite a lot. Good AI is basically considering this as the new tool. It's a tool, as many other tools are, and as with every tool, we need to learn how to use it, to measure it, to evaluate it, and to actually, I need to actually plug for my colleague Shan Thomas, who's the Chief Data Officer at the Department of Business at Trade. I don't know if you've ever spoken to her, but she was saying this. Actually, they're doing a lot of this stuff, but every project they run has an evaluation framework around it, because what we want to know is when it works, but also when it doesn't work. And the more we open about it, the more we can get good stuff. And to me, as a data person, good AI means having good data. And that's part of the work we're trying to do. I'm working quite closely with our deputy chief data officer on establishing data quality. And data quality is not just having a tool that tells you, if your data is wrong, but it's about a culture. It's about making sure that those data pipelines are built the right way, the right measurable way from the outset. And once again, we go back to know your data. You can only measure if you know it's there. So we're trying to basically work with the business on this sort of pipelines that are not data pipelines, they are business pipelines. It's all about how we run operation in a way that then make sure that the data is good. And what the data is good is contextual often. It depends on the use you're going to make of that data.
No, fantastic. It like I say, it's super interesting. It's great for you to come on and explain it. How, in terms of the government sector, you hear a lot about the investment into AI now. How do you think this is going to evolve moving forward? What's maybe the challenges that you see?
I mean, I think once again, it's AI done well. What does AI done well mean? First of all, I think it means first of all AI that improves some process, and that might be an internal process. It might be an engagement with the public. Obviously, there's a lot of talking around LLMs at the moment. LLMs are helping create this conversational interfaces. And once again, can we measure how they are impacting? Actually, interestingly, again, Shan published this incredibly good report around the business benefit of using Copilot, which was actually quite I would say a measured report, and we're all learning from it. I think there is investment in AI. It's a good thing. It's good that the government explores this new technology, because a lot of it is new, and private businesses, I'm sure, are doing the same. But for us, the thing that AI is doing is actually allowing a lot of our senior civil servants to get around the table and talk about what do we see this new technology being able to run public service in a different way. Are we transforming a business line? Are we making a data pipeline faster? Or are we actually rethinking how we engage with the public or among ourselves? And I think with all following guidelines, I mean, DWP has its own AI innovation lab. I'm on its steering board, but I'm not running it. So I can definitely get you in touch with my colleagues to do that. And I think there's a lot of trialing of ideas, and the good thing is that we're accepting, and not all those ideas will work ultimately, but they're teaching us a lot about how the public engages with us and about how our colleagues work. So to me, it's a great opportunity. I did see that opportunity when I was in the NHS, and I would say of the 20 projects we ran back then, not all of those have gone into production, and that's a good thing. It's good to see that we've basically been able to say which ones are actually producing benefits. And often, when I go around the country, those are the questions that come into play. So where have you seen the biggest advantage? Well, I remember when I was in the NHS, one of the biggest things was we did this project that detects Parkinson's disease in brain scans. And that's a research question. It's not like an operational question. But that's been able to massively speed up the work of humans, because image detection is a skill that AI does better than humans. But there are other situations where the advantage is not that clear cut, where actually having people on the ground is more important. And to me, that is the big advantage of AI, is like providing people with better knowledge, augmenting their knowledge about the person they have in front of them. And that is how we can transform really operations. But yeah, I mean, I'd say I'm looking forward to see what happens. I'm really looking forward to supporting that with good data, because I think good data is the basis of having not just good AI, but good whatever mechanism you use in terms of analysis, in terms of operations. So to me, good data is the key element.
Absolutely. Giuseppe, I think that's a great time to wrap up. I think you do a great job. It's such a large organization working across government, working with different teams all over the country. I know you're very active in giving talks and educating and sharing knowledge from the government. So again, thank you so much for that. We often have people who listen to the podcast who like to reach out and ask some questions. Are you fairly open to that? If people
absolutely,
reach out
yeah.
to
Feel free to point them in my direction.
Yeah, fantastic. That'd be great. So yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time coming on. I know you're a busy man. Really appreciate it, and look forward to meeting in person soon.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me.